Hi, everyone. You're listening to The Sharpener and watching The Sharpener. Hey, bonus. The live video of the blog and podcast of the same name, where I talk about the state of the creative industries filtered through my personal experiences. But you knew that. You're an intelligent bunch. I know you all. Well, I know some of you in particular, and thank you for tuning in on the from the different parts of the world where you're located. I know for a fact that some of you are tuning in from Southern Europe and Western Europe, as well as the United States. And I would like to begin by throwing out. Well, first of all, I want to make sure that people are tuned in and people are here before I get started. The point of today's blog and podcast will be to throw out questions I don't know the answers to, and then take yours to kind of probe you for the different things in the media landscape that concern me in particular, and probably concern you too. And to open up the dialogue, because for a couple of reasons. I know how many of you are tuning in. My subscribers, there's about approaching 1,000 of you subscribed to the RSS channel, and the website is doing well. And I know, after having done this for about a year and a half, what this blog and podcast would be about and how I would filter it through my experiences, and also about the power of live experiences and the enduring power of live. I did an entire blog and podcast about what is it about the Eurovision Song Contest? What is it about the Women's World Cup? What is it about live political debates that really cuts through, breaks the clutter? And that, if you think about it, goes all the way to the beginning of the history of radio, when you had these weirdo DJs, in their attics and basements, experimenting with a small crowd of people about what would work in this very improvisational back and forth style. And with the numbers we're seeing now in live broadcasts, even today, the power of live is still very, very important and interesting to me. As far as why I tuned in, why I jumped in at 12:26 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the U.S. and on the 26th of June, I hope someone will ask me that. I will record this session and release it so that even those who could not tune in real time can find it. I realize some of you will ask me have told me that you would ask questions not in real time. You'd sort of drop in and ask me. I'll get to those eventually. Some of you have already asked me questions in advance, and I will attempt to get to those. There have been some very probing, prescient questions so far, so I'm very excited about that. I will record this session and put it out in some fashion. I haven't figured out how I'm going to do that. But if I could ask one thing from you, if you could post your questions via the YouTube feed and on Facebook, either posting to the page or messaging the Sharpener privately. It doesn't matter that much to me, but if we could please limit it to those two channels so that I don't lose my mind and you don't lose yours, just so that it's more focused. Do we have a deal? Good. So the way I want to start this conversation is about I want to frame it based on some big debates, some big picture conversations that are going on now in our media landscape. And again, like I said earlier, ask some questions that I don't know the answers to, but I will give my best shot at, in order to get closer to the truth, that big word, truth, which is so fleeting in our day. And I'll talk about that too. So the first thing is this whole debate of access versus ownership. What do I mean by that? It seems that especially the younger generation, they seem to prize having access, let's say, to a ride, a set of wheels, a driver to take them from point A to point B through Uber or Lyft or other ride-sharing apps, versus owning a car, having access to a hotel room, a place to stay, versus owning a home, or even other types of reservations, being able to have just a quick stint, experiment, just trying something out for a while versus fully committing yourself to it seems to be one of the important things, one thing that young people prize, and it creates a sense of adventure. But on the other hand, what are the costs that come to that? How does, for example, this preference for experimentation, how does it cross over, let's say, to the world of work? And I'm talking also about the people. I want to refer to you guys also in the creative industries, not only the intelligent general audience that I know is out there. In the creative fields, one thing we see in particular is gigging. So you find a job through a job board or through a crowdsourcing job portal, a freelance job portal, or even a posting through LinkedIn, or increasingly on Facebook or other places. That has a freelance gig, something that may last 2 or 3 weeks, where you're designing mock-ups, you're doing art direction, you are managing the community for a company with the potential to send it into to continue full time. But and that's very exciting. That you have the ability to not fully commit yourself, maybe start part-time at a company, but perhaps it comes at the expense of some of the benefits that come with having a more full-time engagement. And how does that affect the future world of work and the future of the creative industries? Since we're on the topic of the world of work, I'm also curious about skill sets in the future of the internet. Will we all, there's the big, hot button question, will we all be programmers? In other words, will we be programming the machine designed to do a task rather than doing the tasks ourselves? Already, we have robots, as a general rule of thumb, we seem to hear a lot that robots are doing, the more routine the task, the more likely it is to be automated. So at, for example, airport passport control, we see robots increasingly checking passports as people go through, but also in fields that you would not associate as quickly with automation. I believe there was a script written recently by a robot that was billed as a good as a crime fiction film, but the script was written by combining the best of crime fiction or science fiction scripts. The result was kind of a cut and paste effort was kind of a cut and paste script, and it didn't really cohere in the end. But will we reach the point where it does? And and if they do you think that machines will be able to is it all that bad that robots will have access to these kinds of jobs? Because the debate seems to be the people who support it seem to say that, well, uh, if if even the creative jobs are automated, it will free up other jobs. So the more routine jobs, like let's say filing papers, or in the advertising industry, the process of buying media will be allocated to machines, and freeing up the more complex jobs, the management style jobs, where more complex leadership comes into play, or complicated creative roles, like being the creative director of a campaign, will be important. So, and another enduring question is, will robots be able to access the jobs that that require psychology, something as human psychology? For example, politics. Can we have robot politicians? Can we have robot psychiatrists? Jobs where persuasion and empathy are required, or even art. I mean, we have robots now are able to compose original pieces of music that are actually quite good in many cases. Do they? The question is, do you need to have had a human experience in order to create a work of art? Where for a long time, the understanding was you have to have you have to have had a human experience in order to create a work of art. For example, Picasso's Guernica, where he was reflecting on a horrific experience during the war. Something as human as that, can a robot have access to it? Another big debate is expediency over privacy. So logins, credit cards, and other new technologies that we're now seeing, like Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. They all give us, all of those things and other things give us what they give us is speed. So they make our lives a little easier, and they make processes a little faster. Also, cash sharing apps. But does privacy of our information get lost in the shuffle? The one thing the skeptics will say is that for everything that creates convenience also comes at a cost for our privacy. Facebook, of course, famously got into some hot water last year over privacy issues and information that was being given to third parties. And then we also have this phenomenon online, which can be social media, can be at times quite the shouting factory, where the dialogue between, you almost want to pull out a box of popcorn to watch two people spar over, was Grumpy Cat, a cultural staple or not. We're all still mourning his passing. And also more serious political things. Is the anonymity of posting something through a profile which may not have all the information about you, or in some cases it might not even be accurate information about you, down to the photos or even the name of the person? Does that create privacy concerns also? Where it is very quick, very expedient to just post a comment online that millions of people could potentially read, that may or not be entirely true. Is there a cost? Are there costs that come with the expediency of doing all of these things? And of course, another question that I want to ask is, even if privacy isn't as privacy may not be that important to some of you. Some of you may view it as kind of, well, par for the course. When I have to, I want to store my passwords on my browser because it makes life a little bit easier. Every time I check, let's say, my bank statements, and if there is a security concern, it's just sort of part of the territory. So does the conversation about privacy versus expediency, does it even, does it really matter that much to you? Or are the sacrifices for privacy just sort of part of it, part of the process, and hopefully nothing bad will happen? Another big trend is just the immediacy. And I'm talking now from a content perspective. So a lot of things we see online seem to be ephemeral. In other words, they appear one moment and then they disappear the next moment. So social media posts, video, Snapchat, particular Instagram stories, especially, which are so important now. I mean, the whole point of them is for them to be here one moment and gone the next, and that is the entire point of them. I call it, which I call the campfire mentality, because if you think about it, when you go camping with friends, you're sitting around this big uncontrollable fire pit. You're telling stories, perhaps. Everyone has had. You're you're far away from your obligations. You're probably in some remote place. People may or may not have had a little too much to drink. So the point is, we have what happens at the campsite stays at the campsite. And well, is that which is why I see parallels with Snapchat. The whole point is to share. It seems to be, especially with the groups on Snapchat, is to share what you want, stories, especially in the moment, and for them to disappear. Other trends seem to be short form. Everything has to be very quick, and the point of what you're saying has to come across right away. The story, could be, this is the temperature of the place, the place I went to this morning. This is the concert I went to. This is the food I ate, etc., etc. We seem to be very far removed from the world of where you sit quietly under a willow tree and read, I don't know, Crime and Punishment, where you're going through like 400 pages of a novel where there's a lot of deep psychological analysis going on in the character's mind, and visuals are not at the forefront, especially when you're reading a novel. You're dealing with text, and lots of it. We seem to be very far removed from that type of content and the way we consume it. So, I mean, I'm not one to take a stance on this, and I don't want it to be the point of this broadcast, but perhaps depth is something that is needed a little bit more, so that we can, complement all the beautiful visual wizardry that we see in our media today. And of course, the goal of what I see as the goal in our media landscape of all the things I just said, it seems to be two things. One is community, and the other one is authenticity. So community created around, it could be created around common interests. There's a great social platform called Twitch, where you see like bands ranging from, like garage bands to very famous groups doing jam sessions, except you're not in your garage. You are broadcasting, kind of like what I'm doing now, to the entire world, and you're getting this unbelievable barrage of feedback coming back at you in real time. You're having literally a jam session with the world. And that is a community. And there are other communities too that are created around shared interests. For example, the app called Meetup, where you meet based on common groups of people who are united around a common interest. For example, learning to code, or learning the Adobe Creative Suite. And there can be other things, other communities around gender, language, where you're from, etc. Immediacy is also very important, because we have this we seem to have this crisis now of truth. How do you know what to trust? And immediacy seems to give people hope that they're getting the real thing. Something that hasn't been prepackaged and manufactured, and perhaps there's an agenda behind it. So immediacy seems to be an important part of the experience. Immediacy also is being able to access things right away with no delay whatsoever, that you can download a book right away. You can self-diagnose an illness. You can find a makeup tutorial for, whatever night, every night of the week. You check everything on your wristwatch instead of on your phone. So does any of that come at a sacrifice, perhaps, to our attention span? Since we're so visually attuned, what does that do to our reading and also to writing? I mean, I hear industry experts say that there are fewer and fewer people with great writing skills. And since we are not so patient about reading, what does that do to writing? Another big picture trend I've noticed is kind of the on-demand. And this takes all kinds of forms. I don't just mean TV, where you can binge an entire show in one night or catch up. If you've missed out on something, there are hundreds of scripted shows out there, radio, podcasts, music, on-demand work. You find a job on a freelance site, apply in an instant. On-demand dating, boyfriend, swipe right. Girlfriend, you got it. Coming right up. On-demand hotels, you want a room for one night, you got it. And I wonder, especially when we're talking about TV and radio and film, does this pressure to create things immediately, does it come at a cost to the content creators? Because in the past, film could take several years to make, where the kinks were worked out of the script, and of course production is a whole other nightmare. Does the pressure to create things at an ever quicker pace, does that create problems on the very quality of the storytelling? And I wonder also if the things I was saying about artificial intelligence and machine learning, how they will come into play in the creation of TV shows. For example, we had a few years ago House of Cards, where the basics of that show were produced by an algorithm, and of course to great success, and the resulting show was very successful. Another wrench that has been thrown in there is, of course, piracy. Does the push from the audience on demand result in piracy? And is it something that we should just accept? And also, if money isn't flowing the way that it might be, if everyone was paying for the content, does it what does that do to to budgets and to content in the long run? A few people say piracy is a victimless crime, but I guess stay tuned. Another big picture topic that I've noticed is customization. It seems that we have more options than ever before to customize every possible thing in our digital world, whether it is our car or our sneakers that we're ordering online or our airplane ride. You're not in first class, you're in business class. You're not in business class, you're in premium economy. You're not in economy, you're in a low-cost airline where you pay for everything, including the bathroom. There are more options than ever before, and more ways than ever to mix and match things. Does customization, this is more for the people in the industry that I'm curious to hear, and well, also the general audience, because psychology tells us that options do make us happier, knowing that you have more than one thing to choose from. But there is a dropping off point at a certain point where you have too many options and it just shuts you down and it creates stress. On the other hand, customization can be an unbelievable thing, and technology has aided customization so much. For example, you can customize let's say you have an amputee, someone who needs a prosthetic leg, that can be 3D printed to your exact specifications. And create a whole quality of life for a person who wouldn't otherwise have it. I think that's an unbelievable thing. Another thing that I referred to earlier that is a big picture topic that absolutely cannot be ignored is truth. I ask the younger children I know if they spend time at school on what is a good source or not, and how do you separate not only a good source from a bad source, but truth from lies. And how much do politics muddle things up? Will our speech be limited by our politics? Another thing is, because, as we all know, every media source, every media company, every news site has its own agenda. And we're in this era where we're not all tuning into the same channels. We're not all tuning into the same radio stations. So we can download an app from whatever site we choose, whatever podcast we choose, follow whatever page we choose, and consume. Increasingly, we can consume the news and hear the opinions that we want to hear and shut out the opinions that we don't want to hear. I wonder, at what cost does that come when you're able to shut out the opinions that you want? Do we create an echo chamber for ourselves, or do we create an environment where we are around maybe a like-minded community? I'd be very curious to hear what you think about that. Of course, I'm referring to fake news, which is, like a second cousin of propaganda. Is the problem of fake news that the audience is not discerning or in identifying sources, or have the fake news agents become so good at making fake news that even a discerning, smart person can't identify it? Because we've reached the point of I hear news stories a lot about deep fakes, where famous faces can be literally spliced onto a video and made, and it appears like they've said something, they've made a statement about something, when in fact they did not. So I get back to the question about the ease of access of information on the internet, and if we give in to all the clickbait that comes to us, does that come at a cost? When does our critical thinking kick in? I think it should play an important role. Another thing that I hear so much about, of course, in the context of news and what is true and what is not, is the environment. It has been such a topic of discussion for so long, where we even have a term that I love. You have cli-fi, where it's a form of science fiction where instead of some alien race coming to invade Earth, or some horrible thing happening, on a space expedition. You have a menacing climate that has come to get revenge on us for all of the things that we've done to it. So that's one topic in particular that seems to be highly shaped by these different news sources. Of course, I want to talk about in the context. I want to make a few comments specific to advertising, because the Sharpener did start out as an extension of my advertising portfolio, and it has always been close to my heart. But I will keep it open for anyone. I will keep things as non-technical as possible. So one big thing that comes up in advertising is context. So is context more important than creativity, or are the two things equally important? So for example, maybe you might see an ad of, let's say, your favorite Starbucks refresher. If you just saw it, at random online, you might not be interested, you might not remember it, 30 minutes from now. But if, let's say, you're driving on a hot day, on a weekend, you don't have anywhere, you have to be in a hurry, and then an ad gets beamed to your phone with that same ad, with a discount about Starbucks refreshers, and it tells you that for a limited time at your local Starbucks, if you go, you will automatically qualify for a 40% discount. I think people might be more compelled to remember that ad than if they had just seen that ad at random, even if that ad was not the most creative thing you've ever seen in the world. So that's what I mean by relevance versus creativity. Even though creativity is very, very important. I mean, things set to music, psychology tells us we're more likely to remember, for example. So creating lyrics, could be important. But I'm talking about, relevance versus creativity, because creativity seems to be one of those buzzwords like authenticity that has been used so much, it starts to lose its meaning maybe after a little while, where you see certain brands that do like stunts that go on for maybe a week to draw attention maybe to this product or the other product. But then, what does it mean in the long term? We have an entire generation now that prizes companies that get behind causes, where it's not just about promoting a brand or a product. They call it win-win-win situations. So where you have a victory, where you're not just promoting awareness for a brand, you have awareness for a brand, you drive people to a store, that's a win for the company that promotes it. And then, of course, it's a win for the ad agency that created it because it was a successful campaign. But then you have the third victory that seems to be important for young people, which is attaching yourself to a cause, but a cause that is relevant to what you're doing, and in a way that genuinely makes a difference in people's lives. So one thing that comes to mind are the city bikes that went around New York a while back, which promoted, of course, Citibank, created brand awareness very successfully, but also had this, health-related impact, got people riding bicycles, and also, you could argue it had an environmental aspect to it too, getting people to use their cars less. And you could argue that, the scooters that you see in different cities around the world now that you can activate using an app have some of those similar aspects. So perhaps the overarching thing behind all of these things is value. So not necessarily just being creative for the sake of being creative, um, but to be or to be authentic, because authenticity, I really don't think authenticity is a goal. It should be to make a difference in the everyday life of the customer. And if it is an authentic connection, that's great too. The final question I have, that goes all the way back to the beginning of this conversation is, are any of these questions that I asked, are they really new, or have we been dealing with this stuff for forever? I mean, the discussion about fake news, you could argue, has been with us since um, as long as propaganda, political propaganda, which has been around, as old as the hills. And also, if you talk about things like word of mouth advertising, has always been, and I have every reason to believe will be a better form of advertising, for forever. I have no reason to believe anything is better than that, or anything else will ever be better than that. So with all of that in mind, I want to open it up a little bit to questions, but I want to first take a look. There is one question I want to answer, but before I do that, I want to take a look at the forums and the chat control room to make sure that I haven't missed out on anyone, because there is one very good question that I got a few days ago that I will read to you. Give me 1 second, guys. So Catherine on Facebook asked, I would ask whether or not we are amusing ourselves to death, as Neil Postman wrote in his prophetic work in 1985. Do we need to regain control of our media, or are we too preoccupied with technology's thumb candy? I love that phrase. To take care about relinquishing our privacy and capacity to think for ourselves. Are we living in Huxley's Brave New World or in Foer's World Without Mind, the existential threat of big tech? So, that is a huge and very intelligent question. As far as relinquishing our privacy and capacity to thinking for ourselves, and sort of passivity versus empowerment, I guess, of the person, the average customer, the average person engaging in our landscape. What I would say is we are both sheep and shepherd in today's landscape. What I mean by that is we are. I'll start with the bad news. We are sheeps because there are. Well, actually, no. I'll start with the good news. We're more empowered than ever because of what I said about word of mouth. I mean, the cream really does rise to the top. There are little obscure, like, bagel places you see in big cities that have zero advertising budget. They're holes in the wall, but or Greek tavernas run by someone who is about 873 years old, and for whom a tablet is like something that you chisel on it. So, but the quality of those places is so stunning in many cases that your jaw drops, and the freshness of the food, the way that our media landscape uses tags. You'll see under the restaurant, known for great service, fresh food, memorable recipes, things like that. Those places end up at the top of the rankings on TripAdvisor without without any push, shall we say, without any budget dedicated to promoting it. So, in that sense, we are very much empowered both as businesses but also as individuals. Reviews play a huge they can they can make or break a business. A good review can catapult an unknown business to a whole other level of recognition, and a terrible review will drive people away, which ultimately reduces your ranking. But I have to say, on the other side of the coin, for every bit of strength, and also, well, I have to say one more piece of good news. You also have content creators who have come up through this landscape. Like, just a random example I thought of is Justin Bieber. He was discovered effectively through YouTube, just playing instruments, and in this totally democratic platform that I'm using right now, and anyone can use. So, in that sense, we are more empowered than ever. However, there are some very big powers and gatekeepers. I read somewhere that there's literally someone who has the key to turn off the internet, like it's a blender or something. There's also big corporate interests behind the news sources, and the way that search results are ranked are influenced by algorithms that are developed by other people. And of course, public opinion is shaped by what we see in our news feed and what those sources are. And the way our information is used, the way our information is sold to other people, I think makes us in a way passive, and there are some serious elements out of our control that have to be looked at. So, thank you for that. Thank you for that question. I do think, going back to what you said, there was one other thing about privacy in your comments. Have we used that amazing term, finger candy? Does that knee-jerk reaction to things make us passive? I think we have to not be on autopilot. I think in today's world, you have to be skeptical and maybe not necessarily trust your first reaction. So that is what I would say to that. There's hope, but there's stuff that needs a serious examination as well, starting with ourselves. The Greeks said it first about the unexamined life. That applies to the digital world also. So I'm going to take one last look at the Q&A, at the forum, to see if anyone has sent me anything. Anyone else has asked me anything, because I realize that I have asked a great deal of questions myself. Give me 1 second, everybody. All right. Well, if I don't seem to see anything here, but if there are no further questions, I have very much enjoyed this session. And if you have questions, even at the end of this session, I would be happy to answer them and to incorporate them into what I do next. At the end of the day, in this media landscape, the conversation really needs to go two ways. So I'm very happy to do this, and I'd be very curious to see what the feedback is. And it's been very enjoyable. For those of you who've stayed from beginning to end, I see that there are a few of you. I'm very grateful. For those of you just tuning in for the first time, please, subscribe to my RSS feed. My blog is on my website, anastasiasharp.com. The blog is called The Sharpener. Subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you soon. Only on The Sharpener.